We have a few boards to call to order before we get going here. So first of all, we're going to call the select board to order. I think there are 4 of us present in the room. I see Karen Herrick, I see Carlo Bacci, Chris Haley, myself. And I think there are, recalc should call to order also, please.
Yes, recall. Order and
On your dad, to the white side.
Yes. Folks that are on Zoom, can we ask you to just mute yourselves for the moment, please?
Michael
Thank you.
Copeland's on Zoom, Nora Bucko's on Zoom, Lana Sweeney, and Mark Doxer, and John O'Neill is present. John Parsons, is he?
John Parsons was online.
Yep. So I think we actually have to roll call everybody, just to be official. And so folks, when you hear your name called, if you could just unmute yourself and say that you're present, that would be great, please.
Okay. All right. Nora Bucko,
Present.
John Parsons,
Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us. They finally got to say their piece. For years, They're done. And today's sentencing. One.
Folks, could you please all mute yourselves if you're on Zoom? Thank you. Michael Coltman, are you there? Mike, you need to unmute yourself for a moment. Mike, you there? We can't hear you yet.
I'm here.
Great, thank you. Okay, and then,
Lana Sweeney,
Here.
John O'Neill.
yep, Mark Doxer's here. Great. Okay, so we're called to order. And council not yet?
I think we might be, I'm not sure. I'll call it.
Please.
Debbie,
John Sasso's here as well.
Thanks, John.
Debbie Small. Joan Coco. She thought she would come on Zoom, so she may show up. Karen Fotino.
Here.
Karen Panett.
Here.
I should be marking this. Marilyn Shapley. Nancy Zimlack. Here. John Parsons.
Here.
Sally Hoyt.
Folks, once again, if you could please mute, we'd appreciate it.
But Sally Hoyt, if you're here, I think I saw you. Are you here? Can we see the pictures of who's
She's
up?
speaking. Yeah.
On mute.
She's on mute.
Oh,
She's
you're on mute, Sally.
Does that count as yes?
Can you give us a thumbs up, Sally, in the background? You're still on mute, unfortunately.
Can you put your thumb up, Sally? Just to
Put a thumb up really high.
in front of your face.
She's speaking. I think that's a count.
Yeah, I think
We're
she's there.
accepting, we're all seeing Sally. Sandy Schaefer. Yes. Jackie Behenna. Rosemary Di Benedetto. Beverly Cuneo. Jolynn Eck. Karen Janowski. And Nancy Twadros. But we do have a quorum, so.
Great, thanks. And I see Jackie McCarthy from the select board has joined on Zoom as well. So all 5 of the select board members are here.
7, wow.
Great, all right, so let's roll forward. Thanks for joining for the discussion that I kind of titled here, Toward a New Senior Center for Reading. Jackie, if you can go to the next slide, please. So thanks for coming to listen. Here's kind of the order of operations. I'll give a very quick overview. I'm Mark Doxer, Chair of the Select Board. We'll get a presentation by the Institute for Human-Centered Design on Universal Design, followed by John Catlin of Catlin Architecture about a senior center design process. Fidel Maltez, Town Manager, will give an update on the process at 17 Harnden Street and review of some other options that are being explored. Council on Aging, Marilyn and Nancy talk a little bit about the process and lead a discussion. And then what we really want to be able to do after all that is to listen and to hear some of your questions. But we thought we'd share with you first kind of what's going on, what's happening in general, and then we'll get your feedback in terms of what's happening. Folks, there are some other seats just in the middle over here. Thanks for joining. Okay, next slide, please, Jackie. So how did we get here? Basically, the Pleasant Street Center has not been able to meet the needs of the senior community for many years. Sorry, this is a rolling slide. Next one, Jackie. 2017, UMass did a study that outlined the deficiencies in the center, and that's available on the recalc page of the town website if you're interested in seeing that. Many citizens have raised concerns on a regular basis about not having sufficient facilities nor resources. Specifically, the pandemic made some of these gaps even clearer to many of us. Only one area is available for programming, the main floor, and it's often too small for the activities we want to do. The only restrooms are on the second floor of the building, despite most of the activities being on the first. The kitchen is not appropriate to the needs. It's capable of reheating, but it's not really capable of doing other things at this point, and not sufficient programming to take care of the needs of the community. Next slide, please. So, Recalc, the Reading Center for Active Living Committee was formed for a few reasons. One, noting that the demographics of Reading are shifting. The community is graying, if I can use that expression. 27% of the community now is age 60 plus. By 2030, it's estimated to be 30% plus, so even higher. There was an instructional motion at town meeting to find more space for senior programming activities and to add more money for programming going forward. This was an instructional motion. This is last November. The select board voted to form this group Recalc in November of 2021 with a mission of exploring the current and future needs of the community and to start planning for a potential new senior/community center in town to focus on residents age 60 plus and possibly other members of the community. Next slide, please. So some activities that have taken place since then, largely through the efforts of Recalc. Number one is to benchmark other centers that are our neighbors. 15 other communities approximately surveyed that have senior or multi-generational centers. A community-wide survey was undertaken by the folks at UMass Gerontology Institute, and we received approximately 1,470 responses to that survey, in-town survey. Third activity is the select board approved the use of $900,000 in these ARPA, these are the recovery funds from the federal government, to support seniors, targeting $300,000 toward a feasibility study for a new senior center and $600,000 for additional programming and activities. Next slide, please. So the question that keeps coming up, or kept coming up, is what's up with that former Walgreens site on Main Street that's been empty for more than 7 years? And can't we move there? What's going on with that place? Next slide, please. So the town moved forward and did a request for proposals for space around town, in the downtown and other areas, asking if there would be people that would be willing to lease us space for a period of time. And the first RFP came back, and we found out that the folks that own that old Walgreens building were interested in offering us either a 10-year or a 20-year lease on the building. This is the first time we've gotten any response at all in terms of that space. So the select board authorized the town manager to go one step further, which was to say, well, what if we wanted to buy a space in town, and we asked for different people to respond. We got one response. The response was from the folks that own the Walgreens building. So where we are now, after having spoken with them, and actually we've received a specific proposal from them in terms of what we've offered to us as initial terms. What we want to do is to understand clearly what are the needs that we would want to address with this new senior/multi-generational center. Next slide, please. Can this site at 17 Harnden Street, and this is the one that we see along Main Street that's empty, that has the signs in the window that says for rent. It backs up on one side to the police station. It's across the street from the current Pleasant Street Center. Can the site accommodate those needs? We asked for and received some early sketches to give some feedback on kind of general ideas of what that might look like, how we might work with it. Then we initiated discussions with the community, educating about the need, hoping to identify concerns and to work on answers, to see what those answers might be. Timing and next steps, and Fidel will talk more about this, but we'll be doing some due diligence on the site, doing some inspections of the site, getting an appraisal to better understand its value from a real estate point of view. We'll explore the viability of this option while considering other in-town options. And one potential activity, and what we had envisioned initially, was that we would do a full-blown feasibility study. And that's what some of that $300,000 was allocated for, is to actually do this. We could look at different facilities, different activities, different places in town. We could do a much more detailed look at what's going on. What happened that has kind of interrupted that slightly is this potential opportunity at the Walgreens site. And so the question before us is, do we want to consider that site now? A little bit of short-circuiting the process, although as you'll see, we're not planning to really short-circuit it very much at all. But do we want to take a look at that site and see if it can meet our needs? And if it does, to make a decision on moving forward. And Fidel will go through what that means in terms of next steps and things. The reason I put a question mark here is one of the questions we have is, would the building owner pursue other options if we decide to kind of slow down the process? And the answer is maybe yes and maybe no, but it's a consideration. Where we are now is the select board, through the town manager, will be negotiating with the owner with a plan that we could bring this forward to a town meeting in February. Now, many of you know that there's a town meeting scheduled in another couple of weeks. There is an article on that town meeting that would deal with this. The select board at our last meeting decided to indefinitely postpone that article because we don't have enough information at this point for ourselves, for the other members of the town to take it forward. What we would like to be able to do is bring it to a special town meeting in February of next year. And if we're able to do that, and if town meeting approved it at that point, the next step is it would require a debt exclusion, and it would go to the voters in terms of what that might look like. So that's kind of the process. Next slide, please. And that's the end of my slides. That was the most succinct one I had on the whole page. So let me turn it over then to,
Thank you. To Anna, so in the process of kind of preparing for a new senior center, what we kept hearing is that whatever building is incorporated has to really focus on the needs of seniors, in particularly with a view on accessibility. So we kept looking at each other and saying, we would really want an expert, right, to speak about this, and I'm not an expert in that topic. What we did is we spoke to Michelle, who suggested essentially to reach out to a group in Boston. They're called the Institute for Human-Centered Design, and they'll be giving us a very quick overview of what does it mean to be inclusive in a senior center. So Anna, take it away and share your screen when you get a chance.
Good evening. Who is sharing the screen? I am sharing it, or you sharing?
If you can share it, that'd be great, or we can share it too. It's up to you.
Gabriela, do you have it open?
If not, I'm sure Jackie can do it too, if that's easier.
Let me just see here, hang on 1 second.
Jackie's on.
Oh, she's on. She's quicker than me. Wow. I'm impressed.
Okay. Well, good evening. My name is Anna Julian, and I am the Senior Project Director at the Institute for Human-Centered Design. And I am here with our Deputy Director, Gabriela. Gabriela, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. It's really nice to be invited here to speak to you all. I'm sure Valerie wishes she could be here, but we will present her presentation for you.
Okay. So, next slide. So, quick story about who we are. We are the Institute for Human-Centered Design. We are a 40-year-old international education and design nonprofit dedicated to the role of design in social equity across the spectrum of ability, ages, culture, gender, and economic status. And we recently moved to our new location in Boston. Next, please. Design for your lifetime, not your prime time. This is a famous designer. He was a professor at ISTE, and he was a person with a life experience with disabilities. Next slide, please. Our two core beliefs: design matters and contributes to our sense of confidence, comfort, and control. And design matters most at the edges of the spectrum, and if it works there, it works for everyone. Next, please. So who are the people at the edges of the spectrum? Let's start with the great news that people have never lived so long or survived so much. Next slide, please. And global aging. So the issue of aging is not only in Britain, it's globally, and it's happening across the globe. Next slide, please. So here, ages 65 and 84, this is a tremendous growth in this population. And the second point here is that 40% of people 65 and older have at least one functional limitation. Next slide, please. So this is a professor at the University of California, San Francisco Medical School. She said that all people are not all the same. She divides life as a three-act play: childhood, adulthood, and oldhood. Next slide, please. So the U.S. Prevalence of disabilities, there are 1 in 4 adults have a disability. People with disabilities are the largest minority in the U.S., and 40% of people 65 and older have a disability. Next, please. This is the same slide, same percentage. Here is the prevalence of disability. 40% of adults ages 65 and older have a disability. Next, please. And a reminder about Massachusetts, and I want to focus on the first highest categories, mobility and cognition. So mobility, 90% of adults in Massachusetts has a mobility disability. Only 1.4% use wheelchairs. The majority of people with mobility disabilities have serious difficulty walking or climbing the stairs. 1.4% is a big number, and it's an important number, but it's not the majority. And the next big category is cognition, 10%. Next, please. So here is why it is important. It is a rising tide of brain-based conditions. So one number here is the male suicide among 85 and older is very alarming. Socializing is a key, and of course senior centers are the tool for socialization. Just a reminder that COVID impact was not limited to COVID itself. It was also about the mental health implications of the isolation. Next, please. Hearing and sight limitations in the US, just a reminder how ordinary this is. And both hearing and vision limitations are not to be ignored in a new building. And one thing you may want to note here is the percentage of people with hearing disabilities. 15% of adults have hearing disabilities, and there is really a small percentage of those people that can really use American Sign Language as the primary language. And it's the same with the vision disabilities. It's a small percentage of people that really can read Braille, 10%. 85% of adults with vision limitation have low vision. So that's another thing to consider when thinking about the design of a senior center. Next, please. And 3 categories here, three broad categories for functional limitation: physical, sensory, and brain-based conditions. So this summarizes what I just said, the 2 big categories, mobility and brain-based. Next, please. So general facts about disability in the US today. Most physical and mental conditions are a long continuum of severity from mild to significant and sometimes episodic, like MS, for instance. And disabilities, non-apparent conditions are the norm. So don't assume that because a person is not in a wheelchair or is not blind, does not have a disability, may have a non-apparent disability. And overwhelmingly, the majority of disabilities are acquired over the course of a lifetime. Next, please. This is the global gold standard, policies on equity and inclusion for people with disabilities. That's the global gold standards from the World Health Organization. Next. And key changes in understanding disability. Functional limitation is a universal human experience. As we age, we will all experience some type of disabilities. And the World Health Organization defines disability as a contextual variable. Functional limitation becomes disabling based upon the intersection of person and environments. So people create the context and they can change it also. Next. The World Health Organization recommends inclusive design or universal design as the most promising framework for identifying the facilitators that would, 1, go beyond barrier removal, 2, minimize disability, and 3, enhance participation and experience. Next. So inclusive design or universal design or design for all, different terms depending on the country, is a framework for the design of places, things, information, communication and policy that focuses on the user without a special or separate design. So it's human-centered design of everything with everyone in mind. Next, please. And these are ordinary principles of design. Think of these 7 principles as a way to ensure that no one is left out of the design process. The 7 principles were developed by a group of US designers and design educators from 5 organizations. Our organization was one of the 5 that participated. Next, please. So the first principle, equitable use. The design is usable by people with diverse abilities. Next, please. So learning by paying attention to what works and what fails. So this particular example, this student spent a weekend with her grandmother, documented what she had trouble doing. So this is something very ordinary, not be able to lift a heavy teapot. So the solution that she designed for her grandmother was a device to allow her grandmother to just tip the teapot, and that was the solution. Next, please. Flexible, principle 2, the design accommodates a wide range of individual preferences and abilities. Next, please. So Thomas Jefferson, he created his own solutions. He was a tall man with severe arthritis. So he made his own environment, his own context based on his needs. So perhaps the first stand desk that was created was his stand desk back in the time. Next, please. Principle 3, simple and intuitive use. The use of design is easy to understand, regardless of the user's experience, knowledge, language skills, or current concentration level. Next, please. And this is called the holy grail of remotes. We all have had problems with remote controls. So this one is a very simple one, only 3 functions. One touch is the on-off button. The second is the volume, and the third one is the channel operations. Next slide, please. Principle number 4, perceptible information. The design communicates necessary information effectively to the user, regardless of ambient conditions or the user sensory abilities. So, it is probably going to be a kitchen at the senior center. Think about the balance between natural and artificial lighting and contrast between the counters and the walls, and also contrast between the cabinets and the flooring. Next, please. And a reminder that acoustics is always a good investment, so people can communicate very easily among them, or they don't need to be constantly asking to repeat things that were said. Next, please. Tolerance for error. The design minimizes hazards and the adverse consequences of accidental or unintended actions. So, single user toilet room with an adult changing table, this is on the right-hand side. It's not a bad idea to have at the senior centers. Some people are able to come, not everybody, but some will be able to come if someone can help them to change their clothes. This particular example is in Japan. It's very common there to have senior centers with adult changing tables. It's not that common here in the US, but it will become more common now that the International Building Code has its new standards. Next, please. And a washlet is a retrofit in any toilet. It just needs an electrical connection. Next, please. Principle 6, low physical effort. The design can be used efficiently and comfortably and with a minimum of fatigue. So some seating furniture. So make sure people have the opportunity to lift themselves with the upper bodies. It could be a very fancy furniture or very simple. The upper left is at the LaGuardia Airport, the new terminal. You find those types of seats everywhere there. Next, please. And finally, principle 7, size and space for approach and use. Appropriate size and space is provided for approach, reach, manipulation, and use regardless of user's body size, posture, or mobility. So this particular example is also in Japan. Great toilet features that make people feel confident. Small details like good lighting can make a difference, or also a shelf in every stall, for instance. Next, please. And designing a new senior center is a perfect opportunity for inclusive design. Make a choice to go beyond accessibility. Accessibility is just a baseline. Design for everyone so their needs are met in the facility. Use the process to learn from residents who will use the senior center, and create a place that makes everyone feel more comfortable, more confident, with a great sense of control and well-being. And we all know that that is the goal. People need this type of environments as a way to limit issues like depression or anxiety that were so problematic when people were isolated. And I think that's it for me.
Thank you so much, Anna.
So,
Thanks, Anna.
I think instead of taking questions, we'll hand it over to John Catlin.
Oh, me?
Yeah, if you don't mind.
I'm just getting into the.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah, it's exciting. So another question that came up, of course, is how do we pick an architect, right? If we're going to do a project, how do we pick an architect, and the importance of picking an architect who's an expert in senior centers. So again, I said, who's the expert in senior centers, and John will share that he's done over 50 senior centers, is my understanding?
Something like that.
Okay, well, uh-oh,
Even more.
I'll hand it away.
Thank you for all coming. This is a great turnout, by the way. And I really enjoyed that last presentation because she reinforces a lot of what we've been doing. Everything we do as architects, we learn from our last project. Each one improves over the next. A lot of our directors have taught us a lot of tricks. We've learned a few on our own. So I'm gonna walk you through, I'm gonna move kind of quickly. If you don't mind, is there a way of dimming this light a little bit more?
Yep.
Just this one. Some of my slides are a little bit light. I want to make sure you can see my name, you know? Does that go down? Or does it just shut off? There, that's better.
Keep going.
You can all see okay, right? All right, good. I'm going to start out fairly quickly. It's a lengthy, I did a presentation down for the Mass Council on Aging for their fall conference down on the Cape. And one of your members, I don't, is he?
Chris, no, he's not here.
Oh, too bad. He's a big guy, a big cheerleader for me. He came and enjoyed the presentation. It was much longer than this. It was a 3-hour presentation. Do you have 3 hours tonight?
No.
Did I hear that?
You did.
Yeah. So I'm hoping that, oh, I don't know, mine doesn't want to advance. So maybe I'll push this button. Uh-oh, there we go. I may have to do this, I don't know. Mine should be
We're looking at it
advancing.
for you.
Mine should be advancing. So humans are the only creatures, the only species on Earth that specifically takes care of our elders. That's a big deal, and that's why we're here tonight. I got that out of a book by Dr. Thomas, who wrote a book called What Are Old People For? And thanks. I can do that too. So aging is a state of mind. I'm a young 75. I still play competitive squash. I do about 10,000 steps a day. Staying active is really important. I'll tell you what, I'll just lean over and start pushing these things. So life is circular. And Carl Jung, a well-known philosopher, says we begin life dependent, getting his nose blown there, and we leave life dependent. But our goal in designing these community centers is to end that dependency as much as possible. We want to reduce it and or end it. And we want to end up doing the kinds of things that keep us healthy. And we do it through 3 key issues: nutrition, socialization, and exercise. If we manage all 3 of those, barring genetic problems, severe illness from something, or a fall or an accident, we should be able to age pretty healthy. In fact, as the demographic showed on the previous presentation, we are growing much healthier. We have a better health system, we're better educated, we take better care of each other. So we do it through exercise and socialization. This is a center in Lexington, Kentucky that we did. This one, I'm going to make it happen here. This is a great exercise of my. I call this sitting volleyball. It is fabulous. They have a ball, I can tell you. And by the way, it goes to show that if you have mobility issues, you can still participate in all these programs. And that's what universal design is all about too. I'm going to have to keep moving faster here. So he's a little particular about his walking. I actually use my phone to tell me how far I walked. What we discovered, this is just a recent thing I came up with recently doing some research. Researchers are now finding that physical exercise is critical for vigorous mental health, besides the physical health that you get from moving. Moving a little slowly here. This is a facility we just finished with 3 indoor courts. Yeah, that's pickleball. Oh my God, go back. Well, so much for pickleball. Okay, this is not working for me very well. I should have loaded it somewhere else. Okay. Oh, I know why this is not working. Turn the darn thing on. Huh? How about that? Oh, my gosh. I don't have my assistant here to tell me to turn the thing on. So I'm just gonna go back for a moment here because these are two really critical items. Besides pickleball, this is one that we just finished. My first pickleball court that I designed was about 6 years ago for a senior center. Now everybody wants one. So this center has 3 indoor courts and 4 outdoor courts in Long Meadow, Mass. My partner wants to move there. She thinks that's gonna be a good place to be. And then the other issue that I talked a little bit is nutrition and socialization. This is a teaching kitchen. As we get older, we have to learn how to cook better for ourselves, not only nutritionally, but also as our cohort around us gets smaller, whether kids have left or moved away, we've lost a partner, you gotta learn how to cook properly. And what they do here, which is really cool, is that they bring in local chefs from the community to come in and do a demonstration. I was there one day when they were doing, just before St. Patrick's Day, they were doing Irish soda bread, which is kind of fun, learn how to do that. So getting started. I've done some research on you folks, reading your newspaper articles. You've done a lot of stuff to date to figure out where you're going. And involving the community is really important, and you've done a really great job of that. I always like to say you gotta find out what people think or want. You got to inform. PR is really important in getting a successful center. We want people to know that. We want to test the waters, whether it's the Walgreens or somewhere else in town. You got to look at those things. Allow everybody to be a stakeholder in the process, really critical. And we do it through, I think you got a great return on the last community-wide assessment that we did, we got a 37% return. That's usual is about 5%, so it's really, people really care about this. Focus group meetings, shareholder interviews, stakeholders, I'm sorry, lost too much money in the market, and facility visits. I want to, it's way down at the bottom, but we're going to talk a little bit about that next. It's really important to go see, I understand you've gone and seen a lot of other facilities. Hopefully seen them online, I don't know. So when you go, this is a checklist. My eyesight's a disability, I don't see well. You want to look at parking. So I developed this checklist for groups. We take a lot of groups on tours. We don't go just to our centers, we go to all the centers that we can get to in a day or two. We want to look at parking. How do you get in and out of the building? What is the lobby and reception area? Administration, main entrance spaces, program spaces. We talk about the size of the center. Good, can't read that. Lounge and library, multi-purpose room. We're going to look at all these issues. The kitchen. In this case, this is a commercial kitchen, not a residential kitchen. But if we have enough money and enough space, we will design a residential kitchen where people can learn how to cook on their own. Hallways, we don't like hallways. Our latest designs, about maybe 15 years ago, we learned that we can design senior centers, very large ones, as large as 45,000 square feet, without a single hallway. What are hallways? They're barriers to folks with mobility issues, so we want to eliminate that as much as possible. Restrooms, we'll talk a little bit about those. They're really critical. Storage is adequate, site issues, miscellaneous, and then other things about it. I'm going to keep moving here because it's really critical. First thing you ought to do, as you've discussed here, our chief selectman brought that up, I think, and that is the feasibility study. Feasibility versus design. I get asked often by towns, in fact, this town was a little bit guilty of that, but I won't bring it up. I get asked by towns saying, we have a building, come and put our senior center in. And we did no feasibility study, we don't know how much it's going to cost, and we think it'll work just fine the way it is. And what we do is we find out that if people come to me like that, I say, oh, just a minute, let's talk about it. Feasibility studies, it sets the expectations, establishes a program, evaluates the sites and buildings that you're looking at. Do they fit? Is it right for us? Are we spending money wisely? Establishes zoning and code parameters. Sets proposed budgets, critical. And final design, which is the second stage. You can hire an architect to be your feasibility study, and if they don't really work out well for you, you can always go back out and get another architect. I don't recommend that, but final design is really critical. So it verifies the zoning, code requires, tracks budgets and costs, completes construction bid documents, bidding and negotiation happens, construction administration, and hopefully a year or so later, you've got yourself a great new senior center. We just finished bidding in this horrible environment, bidding environment, the new Wilbraham Senior Center. 16,000 square feet, brand new on a brand new site. And we got 2 bids in right almost on budget, and then 3 bids well above it. And our 2 low bids decided to pull out. So we went last night to town meeting, to selectmen, begged, borrowed, and stealed, and changed some numbers around, and we got the 3rd bidder to go ahead, and he's starting in 2 weeks. Exciting. So, what are your program needs? A lot of us have problems reading drawings, so what we do is that we look at the program, and we put colors right at the start. We start talking about, well, administration, whenever you see blue in our drawings or in our planning, you know that's administration. If you see red, that's what we're designing for. That's for your user group. That's your real program. And then if you see pink for kitchens, toilets, or purple, and the rest. And up here, I think I have a button that does that, yeah. Right up there, let's say the multi-purpose room, and we want to have that room, let's say, seat 200 people. This calculates out, so for a 200 person for dining, we need a 3,000 square foot room. So we start putting those numbers in to help us understand that process. So it becomes a diagram early on. And I put this slide up because what we do is we take the program elements and we make them all proportionally the same size. So obviously the largest room here happens to be our multi-purpose room. And then they change in sizes. I put this up because this town, that was their senior center, a former library. And they had the program, and they felt all their program would fit in that little green box. But you can see, that's the program they wanted, and that's the box they wanted to fit it in. So it's a good learning process to help us understand what our needs are, and we always try to get the best ideas and the best information out there first. It's better to go from good DNA down to bad DNA. It's better to shrink than to say, well, this is what we can afford. Oh, wait, now let's add some more. It works better to start out right and then work your way back. So what we do is you do a diagram. This helps us with the team, your committees and your citizens, to see where things fit together. What's important? Entry, control would be administration, multi-purpose room right near the entry. We worry about where the sun is because we live in New England. We want the warmth and the sun. All our program as much as possible, except for maybe the art space, should be facing south, or as much south as possible. Maybe there's views. In this case, it's a very large building, so this is the adjacencies for the first floor, and that's the adjacencies for the second floor. And then we end up doing this, it's a different plan, but we end up doing a schematic design, which you can see now pink. What is pink? That's program, right? So those colors that follow us all the way through. Our control point is here. We know the bathrooms. Outside, see where the south is. So building organization or adjacent is entry access, reception control, reduced footprint, 2-story. If you're over 10,000 square feet, we really recommend looking at 2 stories. And I've been to towns that say, oh my God, we're gonna have to walk upstairs. You don't want to do that. There's a solution to that. It's called an elevator, but we'll show you how that works. And also, part of the adjacencies and inner synergies, as I like to say, is making sure you have overview. Here's lobby, reception, cafe, library over here, a game room there. Here's the multi-purpose room. They just finished a lecture on senior safety. There's the lobby there, the kitchen's there, the game room's up there. So there's a lot of connections through the space. We call that horizontal and vertical connecting. In this case, I'm standing halfway up the stair. The reception lobby is here. This is what we call the information hub. I'll talk a little bit more about that. Conversation area, library. The lobby is where the action is. A lot of noise. For some of us older folks, it's harder to hear people. That's a noisy area. We want to create other areas around the center where it gets quieter. A library, or a conversation area, or a reading area. So I have a series of key phrases I've dreamed up over the years. And aging in place, well, understanding what that means. But what's really critical to know that community centers are part of, as well as a gateway to the aging network. You go to a senior center to learn about how you can care for yourself. What services are available for you? Shine, all the different kinds of services are available. Social Security help, counseling, nurse help, all that stuff comes into place. It's an infrastructure of support. I always like to really stress that. The senior center is an extension of your family and support system that you have personally through the community. The community is now becoming your infrastructure support also. And we do that again through those three key things: socialization, nutrition, and exercise. So we got indoor and outdoor options. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. And when we do outdoor options, patios or outside walking areas, we like to have visually connect and physically connect to the exterior. In this case, these are both facing, this is a patio here outside, and they're both facing southwest. One's in a suburb and one's in an urban environment. Boy, there's a lot, maybe. So more of the access to the outdoor I just covered. Boy, I'm going to have to hurry through these. Overlooks. What are overlooks? Well, in this case, this is a center that overlooks playing fields. This is in Belmont. This is a 20,000 square foot center in a very small neighborhood. We designed it. If you drive down the street, you wouldn't even know that building's there. You see a house when you drive by. But when you turn around and come across the field, there it is. And the overlook is, these are classrooms. That's a conference card room, game room. They all look across to the fields where the kids are playing, and also it becomes an exercise place. We can walk around those fields. We have interior overlooks in this case. A little bit more extreme example, this is our center down in Kentucky. You can see those chairs are right there, the green one's in there, and then the orange one's out here. But all these look down, so you get all this activity. And what happens is some folks don't want to be too active, but they want to be able to see what's going on. You can see that. You can see people up above, maybe working out in a fitness room, so you get an idea of what you can get involved in. This is, a lot of our centers have presentation platforms, where in this case, this is in Long Meadow, where I think they're doing a lecture on finance. So other areas, retreat, quiet places where you can meditate and read, get away from the edge of the noise, street friendliness. Your building ought to have curb appeal. It should be a welcoming building. I'll talk a little bit about that, but its scale, lower, it could be a very large building, like the one on the left here is 21,000 square feet, but we create porches around it to bring it down, so when I walk up to it, I'm not overwhelmed by the size of the building. It feels like home. Human scaled, part of that.
John, can I ask you to, is it possible to wrap in the next couple of minutes?
Oh
I'm
my
looking at our
God.
time. I wanna accept some input too.
Okay, this thing is moving much slower. I don't know why it wants to be quite so slow. I'll walk you through some of the images. All of our centers have fireplaces. I'm supposed to get 40 minutes if I can. Oh my God. Overlooks. I'm going to just keep walking through it. Walking upstairs, she talked about exercise, we're talking about 6 to 8 flights a day. It's called a stealth exercise. Your stairs, you should have one stair that's open upstairs, everybody up there. They should be at least 50 inches wide with a window seat. Right. She talked about toilets. Very important that these toilets are accessible for everybody. I'm just going to keep moving here. Hands-free entry. We don't use nursing home rails. We smuggle them in. And by the way, what she was saying, they're saying is that we want it to be accessible for everybody. We don't want to make it obvious. You smuggle it in. You're going to keep going here. This is what you don't want to do. If you have a wheelchair and a couple of elders, there's a multi-purpose room right there with 200 people in it. You come out in the hallway, what do you do? So you like to avoid that. This is what you're really aiming to go. Open plan. And keep moving. Come on, baby. I'm going to go by. That's too complicated. That's too complicated. Noise control. She talked about that. Really critical. High frequency background noise causes people to drop out of conversations. So we do a lot of work with noise control, acoustics, and we also use something called hearing loop, which is for people with hearing aids, where only it sounds like somebody's sitting right next to you talking to you. Inclusive yet unobtrusive. Come on, I cut this in half from now.
And half again.
Yeah, I know. I'm gonna go, that's an easy one to pass up. Wayfinding is really critical, and she talked a lot about that in the previous presentation. I want to stress a little bit about information. The senior center is a prime source of information. This is not a very old senior center. I have bifocals. I couldn't read most of that stuff on that board, so we designed things to be accessible for not only handicapped, but for that. And what's critical now is that everybody's using monitors, and we're able to do a lot, and the directors all control these. One's the center, one's group activities, and one's town activities. Hurry, come on, we'll go by site. So if you're going to do a site, it's really critical to know that your handicap needs to be on the side there, and you've got to be outdoor services away from the entrance. And then you've got to be able to get in and get around and stay on this. You need to be able to recycle on site. If you ask people to leave the site to come back on to pick somebody up, you're going to have problems, you're going to have accidents. Go by this. Hurry up, hurry up. I'm going by this. Being outside, absorbing vitamin D naturally allows your calcium to vitamin D and calcium together is what builds your bones. If you don't have vitamin D working with calcium, you're not going to have strong bones. So we get a lot of people outside. Keep looking by those. I want to mention this too, because one of the new things we're doing is we're having outdoor performances from the indoor platform that you saw earlier. So you can come out and have outside experiences. I'm hurrying, I promise. I'm going to go by that one. Oh, pickleball.
We love that.
There you go. You got to play it, man. It's fun. Bocce, lots of these. You need space for that, by the way. The cafe is critical. Hurry up now. You can come over and hit me. This one is unique because in Worcester, it was a dining car company. We found it, the dining car companies are all named there, so we picked up on that theme. And the last one is coat closets. Really critical. This is a brand new center. They never thought about coats. What you really want to do, it's funny, the simple little things. You want to be able to walk up, anybody who has mobility issues, they can come up, get their coat, they know where it is, they can see it. I'm going to skip over lighting. It's important, but almost. Come on. Okay, last but not least is the wayfinding. Did I say that earlier?
You did.
Wayfinding is really critical. She talked about that in terms of space and moving through space. I will tell you one thing I learned. We took Vaseline, put it on our glasses, and walked across the floor with no pattern. And people ended up over there. But if there's a pattern, and you have, let's see, vision issues, you can find your way across the floor. So what you do is you create floors that have patterns on them. And they're, by the way, they look cool. And the healthy, young, active seniors don't have a clue about it, but it really works. Sorry. This thing is moving much slower. I want to mention one last thing. I have a paraplegic that works for me, and she's bariatric, you know, large. Her wheelchair won't go through an ADA accessible door. That's a 3/6 door. It doesn't work. We learned from her that the door needs to be 3'6". If you have two 3-foot doors, somebody has to get both doors open. And usually one door is always locked. So we've learned now that all our doors are 3'6". And when you walk in, you know how you push a button and they'll open? She taught us that what you do is we have our buttons that you just move your hand by, and it opens. Our last two centers have that. I swear I was almost done. I'll go through this. Multi-purposers are really critical. I'm just going to show you some of the examples of them. That was opening day in Holyoke. I lied, you know. So they need to be large. Your reception area, when you come on, there's only a few people lots of times, but when a big event ends, you got to be able to get out and move around. And administration should always be right at the reception area. That's the control point for the center. Senior centers, when I hear senior center directors saying, oh, I'd like to be up on the second floor, I keep talking to seniors. That's not a good move. I've had that, by the way. And as soon as she retired, they took her office and moved back to us. And all our centers now have fireplaces. They're not very expensive, and everybody hangs out in fireplaces. They even run them in the summer in Holyoke. I don't know why. I'm just going to keep going here real quick. Oh, come on. There's some way of leaking.
John, I think I need to ask you to wrap it here for the final.
Anyhow, thanks.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you. No, it's great.
Give me 2 hours next time.
Next time through.
I will power through and thank you for bearing with us.
Bearing with me.
Mark is giving me 2 minutes for this one, so slide 2, Jackie, when you get a chance. So this is basically to reiterate what Mark Doxer already said. We have begun negotiations with Walgreens. The select board voted $25,000 for due diligence, and that is starting right now. And if negotiations are successful, we will call the select board will call it a special town meeting in February. Next slide, please. So just the what I wanted to do was kind of give a high level view of all the options that we have looked at for a senior center. So next slide, please. Obviously, the first one is what we have been talking about tonight, which is is the building on 17 Hardin Street, formerly known as Walgreens. This is a very high level theoretical schematic. If we pursue this project, we will do everything that John Collin just explained, but we did want to get a high level comfort view that everything that we think we need can fit in there. Next slide, Jackie. There is a second floor in the building, and thus some more potential for space. Next slide.
Is there square footage known on the Walgreens building?
It is roughly 15,000 square feet. 15,000 square feet.
10 on the first level and not quite 5 on the second level.
So you know, there are pros and cons, obviously, to this building. In the pro side, obviously, it's already built. We don't have to put a shovel in the ground. It will be quicker. It's a renovation. There is a potential for less unknowns, assuming that we are very thorough in our inspections. And compared to the other options, we believe that the costs are going to be lower. The arguments against it, of course, is that we are working with an existing building, right? So we got to fit our usage into that building, which could make it harder to design. And we have to be thorough in our inspections to ensure that there's no surprises. In terms of costs, there's two components to the building. Obviously, one is the purchase of the building, and what we are tracking right now is what we believe is going to be $5 million for the building to buy it, and based on the initial construction drawings, the estimate for construction is between $7 million and $9 million. Obviously, there's a lot more work that has to be done to finalize the construction cost. That means that the total project would be $12 to $14 million.
Just interrupt for 1 second, excuse me. Just to be clear on the cost for the building, that is something to be negotiated. What we're showing you just is the initial offer that came in.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So another option that we have looked at is the possibility of expanding our current building, right? So what you see here is on the bottom is a ground level parking area, essentially with a second floor that has all the programming. So on the box on the right is what a second floor would look like. Next slide, Jackie. And again, there's pros and cons, right? Obviously, the argument for is that we already own it. We don't have to buy anything. We could potentially be maximizing our use on that property. The arguments against this is that tying it into a historic building could be difficult. And it's not impossible, but it could be difficult. We would have to do site work, essentially, you know, build a foundation, a structure, etc. The neighborhood hasn't been approached, so I'm not sure how the neighborhood would feel. And most of the programming space would be on the second floor. That could be a negative. It's a longer lead time, and we would need to find a temporary home for our current building. We asked the architect that we have engaged in the project to do a cost estimate. He provided a cost somewhere between $18 and $21 million. This is very preliminary, obviously. You know, I wouldn't take this to the bank, by no means. Yes, sir.
Yeah, theoretically, how many square feet would this deliver?
It's about the same. So we're all looking about the same. 16,000 square feet or so. Next slide, please. Obviously, we've heard the option of building a brand new center from the ground up, if you will, on Simon's Way. On Simon's Way, which is on the other side of the ice arena, we own roughly 4 acres that is buildable land. It's on Simon's Way. Because of the land, we do have the option of going a little bigger at 36,000 square feet, but this is purely hypothetical at this point, right? I mean, it basically back of the napkin kind of stuff. Next slide, please. And on this one, of course, there's pros and cons, right? The arguments for pro is that it's a greenfield. We would have a lot of flexibility, plenty of parking, and we could design it however we want. The arguments against is that it is not in the downtown area. It would require significant site work, excavation, a lot of trees that have to be taken down. There is the potential for neighborhood impact. The gun club is a few feet away. It's close to a school. All of these things that we have to consider, and obviously it's the longest lead time in my opinion. John didn't share how much his bid was on his youth center, but we rough ball estimate somewhere between 30 and 40 million dollars, but this is a purely a guess at this point.
That's at 36,000 square feet. What if you build something small?
Right, exactly. Not sure.
They're running right now at 750 a square foot.
Okay, yeah. Next slide, please. We've also talked about a senior center on Oakland Road. We took a very high level view on this one, not even to the same level as Simon's Way. Essentially, as you all know the site, what is really easy to build on it, and I say easy, right? I mean, what is easier is the right side of the property, and what the architect is showing here is essentially a two-story building, roughly 15,000 square feet altogether, and parking kind of on abutting Oakland Road. Next slide, please.
Excuse me, so Oakland Road is across from the high school, just so everyone's clear.
And again, on this one, there's pros and cons. It does have some flexibility. We can design, to a certain extent, and there is parking in the design. The against, obviously, we're not in the downtown. Side work, neighborhood impact, which we're hearing a lot of. It is longer lead time, and traffic concerns on Oakland Road. And on this site, we've heard a lot of concerns about site work, about ledge, about a lot of conversations about this site. So the estimate is very speculative at this point. Next slide, please. And in terms of other options, right? So what I've heard is that we should approach the Market Basket and see what they got. We have done that both through a direct contact and also through procurement. And I'll say that they're not interested in us going there. Another option that I've heard about is the RMLD building at 230 Ash Street. And the biggest question mark there is of course, where does RMLD go, right? Because it's their office, and in order for them to leave, we would have to build an office, essentially. And I think that's my last slide. Thank you.
Oh, you're much quicker.
And now Council on Aging.
All right, you have our slides?
We do.
Okay. And I see
Jackie will pull it up.
I see Joan Coco has joined us. So Joan, you're here tonight? Yes? Yes. Okay.
Jackie, the Council on Aging presentation when you get a chance.
So this is the last presentation, and then we want to open things up for
Thank you.
questions and discussion.
And this one is very quick.
And we'll
5
start,
seconds.
we'll start with Nancy.
Yeah, next slide, please. For those of you that don't know, every community in Massachusetts, there are 350 Council on Agings, of which Reading is one. Reading's Council on Aging acts as a board of directors, and there are 10 members, and we're always looking for volunteers. And I think you can summarize what we do in 3 words: educate, advocate, and collaborate. And that's what we're doing tonight. Next slide, please. And I'm going to turn it back over to Marilyn, chair of the committee, to talk a little bit about what we've been doing on this project.
Thank you, Nancy. Nancy is our secretary. We asked to be here in part tonight because we wanted people to be aware of us, and my voice classically never carries, so I'm going to do my best. we wanted you to be aware of us because we're a resource, in particular to the elderly portion of the community, but to the community as a whole. Advocacy is, I would say, our primary goal. And in that capacity, we're natural partners on this project. We have a voting member on the recalc committee, John Parsons, who's one of the people that's out on the screen there behind the scenes. And the COA very much supports the new senior center initiative, going back to those studies from 10 years ago. We're the first to say the current center, it does a lot of good things for a lot of people, about 1,000 people right now, but it's not an inclusive environment. If you still have a job, you have that's a 9 to 5, you have no access to it. If you're in a wheelchair, it's really hard to get around. It's not impossible, but it's not age-friendly. There are probably 100 other ways in which it's not inclusive. I know acoustics are a challenge. People who are hard of hearing complain. It's really hard to hear. It just isn't as inclusive as what we want this opportunity for a new one to be sure it is. In addition, we want to make sure it's big enough to meet the growing needs. As you saw the slides before, the over 60 population is getting to be a bigger and bigger chunk of that curve every year. We've been in the Pleasant Street Center, I think it's 30 years now. So imagine 30 years of growth in whatever we build right now. And we wanted to make sure that the mindset isn't focused on just meeting the needs or maybe just the needs of the current ones and a little bit. We want to make sure we're really thinking ahead so that 10, 15 years from now, we aren't saying, why didn't we think of that? and Mark hears me tell them this regularly, as does Vital. We make a lot of noise, and we try to ask a lot of questions, and it's been working. Next slide, please. We raised the issue of universal design, particularly when the Walgreens opportunity came up. Things suddenly seemed to be turning upside down, and we were hearing a lot about what a great deal it would be and opportunity, but I wasn't hearing much about how wonderful a space it would be to make a more inclusive setting. It doesn't mean it wasn't being thought about. It just means this isn't where the dialogue was mostly. And we started pushing hard, but we really need to bring in some experts because we all have a lot to learn. And we wanted that. And tonight's presentation is a reflection of our having been heard. And thank you. These are great presentations. We've got to make more noise. Along the same line, the architectural input. We wanted to make sure that people who've got experience in this were having a major voice. And the council can see the need, but we're not experts, and the select board's not experts, and recalc's not experts. We need this input, and now. It's not sufficient to say, oh, ADA requirements will cover it, don't worry about it, because one of the things we learned right away was ADA requirements are minimum standards. And minimum standards, going back to that door example of 36 inches is not adequate for all wheelchairs. We can do better than that. It won't necessarily cost more. We just need to understand it and do it right from the beginning. So we had concerns, and we raised them regularly, and on the first 2 rows up there, we really appreciate that we are being heard. Parking is an ongoing discussion. My understanding with Walgreens is there are about 60 spaces that have been identified, but we're still saying, will they have signs that say these are reserved for people who are 60 and over, or for people who are using the senior center if we go to the Walgreens site? So that conversation, I think, is still going on. A lot of those sites are used by local businesses. They're used by the police department. They're used by all kinds of people. So we're talking about displacing some people. So maybe it's a given, but sure doesn't feel that way yet. So we gave a smaller check mark on that one, but we're grateful that the discussion is going on. And then things that still are out there to be considered are making sure we do accommodate that growing population so this building can last a long time. We keep hearing that one of our challenges is that there's just not that much space in Reading. Well, if we need a new space 15 years from now, it's going to be even harder than it is now. So we need to be thinking down the road so that 30 years from now we can say, wasn't this wonderful that all these people, half of whom have probably died by now, as we keep saying, we're not going to live to see some of this. But we're hoping that it will be a long-term solution for a growing segment. Right now, there are about 7,000 people who are age 60 plus in Reading, and it's growing, and that's something like a third of the over 21 population, I think. It's a big portion of the adult population is over 60 in Reading, and it's getting bigger. And we should make sure that we're getting the services we need. It's not just a fun thing, it's not a country club for senior people, it's a place that can help protect people from the isolation that can be so devastating as we get older. I think we've probably all experienced losing close people through the pandemic, and as we get older, the crowd gets thinner, and finding new ways to get engaged, to stay involved in the community, to make new friends are critical to the quality of life, and that, in my mind, is the key reason senior centers exist. So we make a lot of noise advocating for it, and we want to find out more needs. Again, we're not experts, we need to hear from people. The survey is great, and we did get a great result, 7%, but that still leaves 93% not heard from. We'd like to hear from you. And the Council on Aging is one way to have a voice and to become involved, and with that, I will turn it back to Nancy.
Oh, I just have a couple words here. Next slide, please. We have monthly meetings. Please Zoom in. Please come and attend. You're all more than welcome. And we don't have you can, if you have ideas or questions or things you would want addressed, right now you can send an email. That's me, njzimlak@gmail.com, and we'll bring those to the Council on Aging, and it will be part of the discussion. So we really encourage involvement. It's your Council on Aging, and that's it.
Yeah,
Thank
and
you.
the meetings are posted on the town website. It will tell you where they are. There's usually a Zoom link. We've started doing we've had one in-person, hybrid, in-person/Zoom meeting so far. But it's all, wherever it's going to be each month, it's on the town website. And all you have to do is come or dial in.
Thank you. So we got another 5 presentations for you tonight. Go ahead, Mark.
So we'd like to hear from you. Questions, comments, ideas would be great. What we'd ask is if you can stand at the podium, then the folks on Zoom, folks on RCTV will be able to hear your questions and we can address them directly. So please, somebody's got to be the first. We have a volunteer. Please. Nancy, please come up.
Nancy Dr. Pearl Street and a Precinct 1 town meeting member. I did promise a neighbor I would ask this question. Of the sites that you've considered, have you reached out and spoken to the 2 Catholic parishes? My understanding is because they've combined their sites, that there's possibility that the one on, I forget the name of the street, must be St. Agnes's.
St. Athanasius, maybe?
Or maybe that's it. May have a community center that's underutilized next to the new condo apartment that was built.
Oh, no, St.
Or Woburn Street, thank you. Okay, I forget I don't know the names of the 2 churches. And whether or not there had been any consideration to consulting with them about renting that space for use for the seniors. The other is, was there ever any consideration to think about combining the Killam design with a new senior center, much like, so I think it's Wampscott. Not necessarily as big as some of these presentations, but it would not be hitting the residents with too large debts. Because what I keep hearing from a lot of my neighbors is they can walk, talk, and chew gum, but they can't pay for 2 major projects. And that's something that we have to consider, particularly given the aging population that will be aging and they may not be working into their 70s in terms of property tax. So that's my concern. And I guess the other piece that I would ask is, was there any consideration to looking at how to meet some of these needs outside of actually creating a new building, but instead having more use of what we already have in our town, you know, pods, mods, sites that are throughout the community, as opposed to something that's so centralized? I'm not an expert on any of this, but we have a lot of wonderful space. We have the library, which was sold to all of us as our community center. And I just think that maybe, particularly with the schools, for those seniors who are still working, we used to have a wonderful nighttime kind of continuing ed program that we really don't have as much anymore. I mean, I just think there's also things that we should consider if we cannot afford to build a new senior center. That's all. Thank you.
Do you want to address the
Sure.
first?
Yes, we are talking to the Catholic parishes. I think I don't want to go into more detail because it's a very personal, I think, on their part. And I think I'll stop there. I mean, I'll say that in terms of looking at other places, absolutely. I mean, we have looked and we continue to look and we will continue to look. The goal of us is to increase programming and increase participation, knowing that we got to move the building. So one example is every Wednesday, I think at 11 a.m., right, at 11 a.m., we do Wellness Wednesdays here in this room. And the last one, I think last week, we had over 60 people in the room. I mean, food provided, presentation. So absolutely. I mean, we're doing that. We are. Another example is we're speaking with Bertucci's, for example. They have a room that is could be used as a lunch and learn activity. So to answer your question, Anthony, absolutely, we definitely are.
Just to add a couple more things to that if I could. So in terms of different possible locations, for example, Killam, a few things. One, you'd have to have completely separate entrances. Two, it's not reimbursable. Three, the timeline for that project, if approved, is pretty far out. And fourth, I think that even if we were to utilize, and we do, many different facilities in town, the Pleasant Street Center still isn't adequate to meet even the basic needs there. And we've been looking at different solutions, adding bathrooms, doing all sorts of different things, and it's deemed that that's probably not the right approach to it. Centralized versus decentralized, and you guys should chime in also. To use other spaces is wonderful and important, and the town does have those. If there are so many different spaces, it becomes more of a puzzle. Okay, where is this today? Is it in the right place? How does it work? So too much decentralization, I think, is confusing for everybody and too difficult to do. Using town spaces is wonderful, and we're exploring doing more things here at the library and other spaces that might be available. But I think even with all that, we've come to the conclusion, and based on the studies, that the facility is part of the change that's required, and programming is part of the change that's required. The ARPA funds that were allocated, the $600,000, is meant to kind of do more programming. Town meetings instructional motion said we want to see more programming, more activity. So we appreciate that. We also appreciate that with a new senior center is going to be a requirement for a more substantial budget on an ongoing basis, and more support to that activity. And so that has to be part of the equation also in terms of what's going on. But at the end of the day, the size of the community, of the senior community, the 60-plus community, is growing very substantially. There are more needs that we're not currently able to meet. And in my personal opinion, the two highest priorities that we need to focus on are going to be a new senior center and the new Killam School. And I appreciate those are both projects, substantial projects, debt exclusions. It's not either or, it's and. Those are the two highest priorities we've got.
John Sasso has a question on Zoom.
John, please.
Hi, thank you. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
So, John Sasso, member of the Recalc, and I have a question for the architect. In our view, in review of the different centers that we visited, as well as things that we've researched, we've seen a lot of communities attempt to reuse existing buildings. Like Everett used the church, and a lot of the centers that we looked at up here have been, prior schools or libraries. And I know, I think I heard you say at the beginning of your presentation that you really didn't find that to be a real valuable or appropriate approach. I'm just curious, two things. One, have you had some experience with doing repurposing of existing buildings? And if so, is there any guidance or information that you can share, beyond just the types of things you showed us in terms of consideration? Are there other things that we should be considering if we were going to repurpose a building?
Very good question. We've,
Can I ask you to stand up, John?
oh, do I have to go do that?
Please.
Forgot my walker. Is this microphone working?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, good. It is a tough one. Most buildings don't have the kind of spaces that make senior centers. Our most successful one was for the city of Worcester, where the city was given by St. Vincent's Hospital their nursing residential facility and teaching facility, which included a very large multi-purpose room with a stage and an existing kitchen which was expanded. In the end, the problem was that was the closest we got to what would make a normal program for a current senior center. Senior centers I can go through myriad of middle schools that were given to the seniors to try and renovate, and by the time we get done figuring out the cost and everything, upgrading to meet current code, it really ran the numbers up too high. So our very first ever rehab was 30 years ago here in town. The building was given to us by the town, and they had a grant, and we tried to explain that you really, it didn't have the proper space for bathrooms and accessibility, but we were told to go with it, so we did. Since then, we've learned a lot about rehabbing. We've been asked to rehab probably out of our 50 or 60 centers that we worked on, we've looked at as many as 10 to 15 rehabs. And a good example right now is the town of Wilbraham, and I'll make it shorter now. The town of Wilbraham, they have a memorial school. It's a 50,000 square foot school. And there's a huge push by a particular cohort to rehab that school into a senior center. They only needed 15,000 square feet of it, but we were required to bring the entire building up to code, which means sprinkler system, which they didn't have, asbestos everywhere, even though it was a school, it was very old school. All the wiring was outdated. They didn't meet energy stretch code requirements for insulation. The windows were aluminum without thermal breaks. So by the time we got done trying to figure it all out, the right solution for them was a new 15,000 square foot building on land right behind Town Hall. The biggest challenge in every one of these projects is finding land or space or a Walgreens, if you will. We were asking Athol to convert an old Rite Aid into a senior center. It was marginally successful. I'm trying to be nice. It was used temporarily for the library while they built a brand new library, and then they slid the seniors in there. The seniors, I don't mean to be disparaging about a lot of communities, but you're unique that you really are making an effort to look for a new building or to develop a good building that, by the way, 30 years is not long enough. 50 years is more like it. So the hardest thing is finding a site. And you want to find, I'm sorry I didn't bore you with it. I have a whole section on site selection, which I didn't include, thank goodness. Site selection is a very complicated process. And one of the things that for the Walgreens, when you do due diligence, 21E is really important. You have no idea what was underneath there. We just wrapped up a new senior center in Longmeadow, and they were doing the DPW, and they took over an old tennis court. And they started working, and they ended up hitting $2 million worth of asbestos. So it was not a pleasant experience for the town. So due diligence is really critical, but due diligence is also code. issues. And the last one I'll tell you is the town of Ashland. We were asked to come in after a feasibility study was done on an old American Legion facility, to put an addition on it. And what we discovered was, first of all, there's a lot of asbestos, and they had town daycare in there, so we pulled them out. What we also discovered was that the American Legion folks did their own wiring. So in the end, it was going to cost more to try and fix that. We ended up tearing it down and building a brand-new combined intergenerational building, which is quite rare. We were able to do it because of cut and fill. We put the kids underneath, the elders on top. They had their own parking lot. The kids had their own. It worked out pretty well. Small. So anyhow, rehab is tough. It always is. If you get the build from scratch, I can tell you, you'll get the building you want. But I kind of like that work that somebody showed for the old senior center. It looked interesting. It was unfortunately all on the second floor, but that might have some possibilities too. And to be fair about, Walgreens intrigued me. When I saw the plan, I was kind of heartbroken, but I understand that it was a fit plan, okay, to be fair to everybody. It was not a real, and you probably saw from some of my presentation that movement in these spaces is really critical, and openness is really a big part of it. I think there might be, your parking is a big problem there. That space, 16,000 square feet, you need 100 spaces minimally. And you need to be able to drive in with one way in, one way out. Seniors run into each other a lot. And one last thing, and I know I won't stop, but in North Andover, we're building a brand new center, and the old center is right behind Town Hall, and they shared the parking lot with the Town Hall. There's not a single person in Town Hall will park in that parking lot. There's a reason for that.
Thanks, John. Other questions or comments? Tom?
No, the loudspeaker is not working in here as usual.
Sorry about that.
A couple points I wanted to make. I guess our architect is leaving, but I've heard the number. I've been curious about what adequate space would be for a senior center. I've heard numbers like around 15,000 square feet a number of times. So if we go from the 7,000 at the Pleasant Street Center to something like the Walgreens, we're getting to that right kind of number. Two other points. The older I get, the more I like old sayings. And the old saying I'm thinking of as I'm listening is a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. And the other thing is, if you project these other buildings, you're talking about an extended timeline. I doubt costs will come down from what you're estimating now. So if we're talking 20, 30, 40 million, is it going to be 40, 50, 60 million by the time we get there, going through all the considerations? The last point I'll make, and I mentioned this to you, Mark, is that there's a $350 million transportation bill passed by the legislature, of which $50 million will be devoted to community transportation. And Fidel, I was going to talk to you about this because the person that's running that grant program I talked to recently, and I told her about recalc and what we're doing, and she's quite interested.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Oh, one other point, and I won't talk as long as that. Transportation, I do a lot of work in the aging field, nationally and internationally. There's a lot of innovations going around, as you know, with Uber and Lyft and a lot of other things. And that may open up a whole nother thing, because this whole field is exploding because of huge economic opportunities for new startups.
Tom, can I just ask you for the record just to say your name and address?
Oh, my name is Tom Model, I still know that, and I live at 93 Oak Street in Reading.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Yeah, hi, my name is Tim Matthew at Briarwood Avenue in Reading. I don't attend a lot of these meetings, but I thought I'd come and learn. Just wanted to share just some observations and opinions. So given the growth of the senior population, it's not clear to me that over the long term, 10,000 square feet on one floor and 5,000 on another is really adequate, looking at it years out. Also, the pictures that the architect showed are lovely, but they're in places with land and cheap land, like Lexington, Kentucky. Those are beautiful aesthetics of being outdoors and the birds chirping. Probably not going to happen when you're looking across the parking lot at cement in the police station. That's why I actually like some of the other plans that are further out and require more money, but I think they offer a little more long-term potential as the population grows. Also, I moved back to the area 15 years ago. I've been in Reading 15 years, but I moved for many, many years. I lived in northern New Jersey, which is usually the brunt of jokes, but it actually has some of the finest suburban communities in the Northeast. And when I look at Reading, I see it as having fabulous bones downtown. And forgive me, I have a cold. But a lot of unfulfilled potential. The heart of the town ought to be Haven Street, but it's a ghost town at night. I remember several years ago, if I remember correctly, Belmont placed a vote that didn't want banks in town because banks in the evening don't create a sense of community because everybody departs and it's just empty space. And when you really think about coming in on the train in Reading and the new like condo developments where the post office is, you could envision some thriving outdoor dining, people really enjoying this. And so I just look at the big picture in this plan, and this is why I came tonight, and I'm not really sure what the long-term vision of the use of space in Reading looks like. If I look at the Walgreens, what we'll be doing is taking some prime retail space and putting it to good use, but it is potentially tax revenue generating. And at night, you'll see the town hall, which is likely quiet, the church, which is quiet, and I don't know enough about senior centers to know what activities go into the evening, but likely quiet as well. And then Haven Street at this point is quiet. And I just think the town for the long haul could likely be more vibrant with just some patience and some really thorough planning. And so that's why, I mean, if I were voting, I'd probably say put more exploration into some of the things you're investigating with the church, as well as the land that we own, because I don't think ultimately the use of Walgreens offers enough long-term upside. Thanks.
Thank you. Please.
Hello. Todd Merkel, Sanborn Lane, town meeting member, precinct 8. I just had a couple comments and one question. The comments first, I just wanted to point out, I think it's important to note for apples to apples purposes that the architect, John, who just left, I believe, he mentioned, I don't know if you all heard, but he mentioned that these brand new buildings that have been built from the ground up recently are costing approximately $750 a square foot, excluding the land, assuming that the municipality owns the land. So I think it's important to note, if you take $750 a square foot times 15,000 square feet, that's just over $11 million. So I think the idea of putting a 36,000 square foot prototype at Simon's Way and saying it's $30 to $40 million to build that, it's nice, but I'm not sure why it's relevant. It's a building that's 2.5 times larger than the Walgreens building. So obviously, if you're building a building that's 2.5 times larger, it's going to be 2.5 times more expensive. So I just want, like I said, the point is, assuming that number is correct, whether we took land on Oakland, at the high school, on Oakland Way, is it Oakland Way?
Oakland Road.
Oakland Road, Simon's Way, or anywhere else, at $750 a square foot, a 15,000 square foot building is going to cost us just over $11 million to build from the ground up. And we have complete control over what we build. We have no constraints, around using an existing envelope and footprint, of an existing building. I'm not saying that because I'm opposed to the Walgreens idea and site. I'm actually generally in favor of it if we can make it work, although I think the parking seems to be a material issue, but if we could make that work, I'm generally supportive of it. I just want to make sure we're comparing apples to apples with the numbers, because it's not 12 to 14 million versus 30 to 40 million. It's 12 to 14 million versus 11.25 million if you're building a comparable size facility. So unless I'm missing something, I think that's right. Second thing I want to point out is, I've already stated this directly to the town manager and some of the select board members. I think $5 million is way too big of a number for the Walgreens property, which is going to be a vacant building. When we buy it, that works out to about $350 a square foot. The existing owner bought that building for $6 million in 2019. They're looking to sell it for $7 million effectively. They'll get $2 million from Walgreens. They want $5 million from us. So they want to make $1 million profit in the context of, I'm in the commercial real estate business, of a building that was bought in 2019, pre-COVID, right? So obviously we've had the impact of COVID. Commercial properties in general, in particular vacant Main Street retail buildings, in particular, again, in the context of financing costs that have gone up by 300 basis points over the last 6 months. This type of property is worth materially less today than it was in 2019. I will assert that. I don't know what the valuation work is going to show, but I would just suggest that this, to me, feels like the ultimate bailout for the existing owner. I'm sure they would love to get $7 million out of this. I'm sure they're salivating at the prospect of it. I would just suggest that it's not worth $5 million vacant, but willing to be proven wrong. And then my last, those are the comments. My question is, I'm just curious, the process, as I understand it, was the RFP was initially issued for a lease for space to property owners around the town. We got the response from the Walgreens owner. I'm curious at what point and why, what was the thought process that caused you to transition from a lease scenario to an own scenario? Especially given, I'm assuming, but this is sort of part B to the question.
I don't think.
Thanks for muting. Thank you.
Part B to the question is I'm assuming, but you got, Fidel in particular, you would know best, I'm assuming, that the town's financing costs, since ultimately, if we move forward with Walgreens and we move forward with the debt exclusion, this is going to be financed with debt, right? So I'm assuming the town's financing costs have increased essentially in lockstep with treasury rates over the last 6 months. I'm assuming that. That's not true. Again, I'm willing to be proven wrong. But I would think that given that, the ownership scenario, if you're financing it with debt that's much more expensive today than it was 6 months ago, would be relatively less attractive than a long-term 10, 20-year lease with multiple extension options. So I'm just curious what the thought process was around moving away from the lease, long-term lease, to an acquisition.
So I'm going to start. So a couple of things. One is that when we saw the proposed cost of a 10 and 20-year lease, those numbers looked like the size of a purchase agreement. If you're looking at, it was $18,000 a month for the first 9 years, and then $36,000 a month for the 10th year, and then $36,000 a month for 10 years.
Prior to negotiation.
Prior to negotiation. But starting with those and seeing what those numbers look like, okay, those were, $5 to $15 million in total. So that's what kind of led us to say, if they're only interested in long-term, let's understand what other option there could be.
Okay.
Second is that there still probably is a leasing option, potentially, that it was offered to us. And to be clear, the only business in town that responded to either RFP is the one that we're talking about, right?
Right.
No one else responded to it.
Right.
So that's kind of where those came from. In terms of rates at this point, we tend to borrow at better than the state, better than just about anybody, because of our strong financial stewardship. But clearly the market has changed.
Not better than the U.S. Treasury.
Not better than the U.S. Treasury. Although we keep getting premiums back when we borrow, which is lovely. So,
And US Treasuries have gone from 50 basis points to 400 basis points in the past 6 months. So I'm
Things
assuming
have
that,
changed.
that we're going up as they're going up. So
Things have
the
changed.
costs of borrowing to acquire this building and retrofit it have gone up, I'm assuming commensurately. That's all I have.
Just to add one more thing, Todd, so whether we lease or buy, we still would have to do the renovation.
Right, of course.
So now, where the renovation is
Although-
larger than the cost of the
In
purchase.
that scenario, typically, the landlord is gonna be contributing a significant percentage of the capital improvement dollars for the renovation. So you might be able to lay off some of those dollars in some percentage split with the landlord.
But in terms of our ability to potentially negotiate different arrangements, I agree with you.
Yeah.
It should be
Okay.
done.
That's all I have. Thank you.
So I see, Dave Panett?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. Thanks for everyone meeting this, having this meeting, it was very informative. I have a couple of comments. One, I want to piggyback with the gentleman that got up and spoke at the podium 2 speakers ago about the old time saying. I want to put out another saying, sometimes you can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear. And I just want everyone to think of that. I'm speaking about the Walgreens from a construction standpoint and a facility. If that meets the square foot requirements of what Reading wants for a senior center, I would think that it could be used, but in its present location, without the parking added. One of the things that the architect mentioned, who has extensive experience with senior centers, the first thing out of his mouth that every location he talked about was adequate parking. Adequate parking, adequate parking came out very clearly in every situation he talked about. Walgreens does not have adequate parking. So if it did have adequate parking, and I mean adequate parking, he said that you need 100 parking spaces. We just went through a very significant parking study for the town of Reading. The town of Reading realized in the downtown area, we have a jaunt of parking. We don't have enough parking in the downtown area as it is, and if we added the 100 spaces that would be required, requested, vis-a-vis the architect's suggestion, where are you gonna get those 100 parking spaces? So on that basis, the Walgreens situation, the Walgreens site would fail. So why would you put a significant amount of money into a facility to be used by elderly people that need safe and secure parking and adequate parking, an adequate facility to enter and exit the building, to get into and out of their vehicles? Why would you put that kind of money from the town into a facility like that without having the adequate parking? That's, my thought about Walgreens. It has nothing to do with the building, the facility, the structure. It's the parking. The parking, on the basis of parking, I feel that facility failed, and it failed miserably. The other thing I didn't hear as a site, and it's something I haven't heard from anyone, is a number of years ago, John Doherty made a suggestion to build an early childhood center on Oakland Road, on the upper parking lot area across from the auditorium on the hill at Oakland Road. Why can't that plan be resurfaced to possibly put the senior center at that location? And land that the town already owns, you already have an architect rendering a plan for a facility that was going to be used as an early childhood center at that location that wasn't going to impinge upon the high school parking or facility in any way. Had that been given any thought? Because the development cost of that site comparative to the site that's across the street on Oakland Road is far less expensive from a construction standpoint, a development standpoint, than the lot that's across the street. Just wondering if that was given any credence or any thought. I understand that the only person that had answered the RFP for Reading was the Walgreens. Just because they were the only one that answered the RFP, doesn't mean that we have to jump on that and go with it if it's not going to work because of the parking situation. Those are my thoughts.
Thanks, Dave.
We decided, is this working or not, or?
It's not working, but it's picking up, I think, for ICTV and Zoom.
All right,
It's not working
excellent.
in the room, unfortunately.
Jonathan Weber, 84 Hartshorn Street. Couple of things. One, I think we should be looking for a long-term plan. And I'm not sure this gets us there in terms of the amount of space and what we're trying to accomplish. So I think we may need to take a little bit of a step back and see if there are other options out there. One option that does come to mind is there land by the DPW? Or should we move the DPW over to Simon's Way? Which would make a lot of sense. Logistically, they'd be out over there on their own, doing their thing. I think there'd be enough space for them to move over there. That would create an awful lot of space right down near two supermarkets. You might be able to do a senior center with living down in that area because there's a lot of space with the DPW. So I think you'd be looking at a cleaner option to possibly do something along those lines. I think it was Mr. Panetta before me, brought up Oakland Road. I just had I met with Fidel over this, and it had to do with the affordable housing and senior center going up there. I'd just like to go on record. Birch Meadow is full. It is not a quiet neighborhood. It is full of cars all day long. There's a ton of traffic. You cannot squeeze any more in there. I also would not suggest putting senior living in an area where you have high school drivers who by definition have their license less than 2 years. And by the way, they're late for class and doing 100 miles an hour. It's going on every morning, every afternoon. Not to mention, we've got 9 playing fields, 3 schools, and a YMCA. It's just full. I would also like to suggest, if Mr. Merkel's available and up to it, he'd be more than willing to do some negotiating for the town. If you're up for it, I'll pay the fee. Okay? I'll do it as a donation, whatever it takes. So that's just my input and my thought. I love what we're doing here, but I think one of the things that John brought up was you can't be thinking 30 years. You need to be thinking 50 years. 10,000 square feet on the first floor, 5,000 on the second, I don't think gets us there. We mentioned 60 parking spaces. Google's a beautiful thing. I had a really tough time getting over 32 from the pictures. And that's not counting stuff on the street and in that area. I do think this is something that would benefit the town going forward. I just think doing it right and doing it on the right scale is the way to go. One last thing, if you're going to straight line how many people are going to be here over 55, over 65, if we're going to tax them into oblivion, they're not going to be here. So I think in all honesty, you could probably cut that number down by 30 to 40% because folks are going to have to leave town because they cannot afford 2 overrides or 3 overrides going into the future. It's just something that is unsustainable on a fixed budget. So unless we come up with some sort of plan to accommodate folks in town that are on fixed incomes, from a tax standpoint of view, you're going to have a tough time keeping people here. And that's a shame. It's hard for kids to stay in town and come back and move into town, even though they're making a ton of money. They can't find the property, they can't afford the property. And the folks that want to stay can't afford to stay. That being said, again, I'm all on board for the project. I don't think this is the right place. I don't think Oakland Road is the right place. I think if you really start to look at some of the other options out there. We do have assets that can be used. And maybe it's the shifting of DPW. Maybe that's something that works for us. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Truly appreciate all the work that you're all doing.
Hi, everybody. Everybody hear me all right? All right. So for those who don't know me, my name is Matt Heselton. I live on 87 Rustic Lane. I'm born and raised Reading. Reading means a lot to me. My family actually is old school, where my grandfather worked for the DPW. My family were some of the original settlers of Reading. Reading is deep in my roots. So believe me when I say, I love living here. I didn't realize that growing up. I really didn't. There was a lot of like teenage drama about I live in the worst place ever, but I grew to learn to love all that's unique about Reading. And I come to you saying, thank you guys for putting this together. There's a lot of hard work and there's a lot of great opinions here. I had a couple of thoughts that I kind of wanted to respond, if I may. One of them was about parking. I hear everybody. Parking's huge. Long term, I'd love to see the town build a parking garage behind CVS. I think that's something eventually we might get to. Right now, I don't think we're there yet. For a senior center, I feel as though this is a great opportunity, and I'm actually very much for putting it in the Walgreens for a bunch of different reasons. Number one, I love the concept of having a vibrant downtown for our seniors. A central location that you can go to, hang out in, and if you want to in the middle of the day, go and have a cup of coffee. There are enough places around to do that. If you want to have a nice meal, it's walkable. If you put the senior center anywhere else in town, in a lot of the great proposed areas, you won't have that. So I think about myself aging in place. I think about everybody else aging in place. I think about my parents. And I just don't see that in the same capacity that you do in Walgreens. So I'd strongly urge us to consider this. As far as the space of it, 15,000 roughly we're looking at square feet. One of the other things that I think I'd heard in previous meetings was there's actually more space on the second floor. Right now we're looking at maybe not utilizing that. But if you're thinking, well, what happens 30 years down the line, 50 years down the line when we need more space? What does everybody else do? You build up. Everything else is building up. So that's a possibility down the line for a footprint right in our vibrant downtown. Speaking of our vibrant downtown, I would like to put forward that right now this is an opportunity we have to control the narrative of what we want that to look like. If we do not move on this, whether or not it's for the senior center or any other project needs, we're giving that up to somebody else, like a Walgreens Corporation, to sit there and leave it as a derelict right out there in our vibrant downtown, to just sit there and do what? We'll have no control over what happens. If they sell it to somebody else, if they choose to develop it, the town has no ability to say, we don't want that right there in our area. We'll have no say in it. So for me, I would strongly urge the board, I don't care what you buy this building for, buy the building, put up a community center, put up shows, I don't care, buy it, control the narrative. Because I think 30, 50, many years down the line, I have no intention of leaving this town, if I can help it. As far as the two capital projects, or the cost on the taxpayers, there are two major capital projects coming off the budget very soon. We have the ability to fund this, even right now in the short term, to get it up and running for seniors right now that can take advantage of it. I really think, and I urge everybody to really think about that. If we're trying to combine this with a Killam or anywhere else, you're talking about asking seniors to wait. We deserve to do better by them. And I don't think that this is rushing to say, let's make Walgreens work. I really feel as though it's something to explore. And if we can make it work with the square footage and long-term, go for it. I promise I won't take too much more time. On the Simon's Way, that proposal, great area. I'm a big fan of conservation space, by the way. I'm sick and tired of seeing the town take land, developers take land, and put something in a space where there were trees and green space. You know what? Green keeps us healthy. If you start tearing all this stuff down, it makes an impact on our health. Sorry to put you on the spot, Andrea, my wife. Is it desert heat islands? What's the term?
It's called a heat island.
Heat island. Look it up. If you have areas that are just parking lots everywhere, those areas become more unhealthy, right? So thinking of over by Reading High, to echo on that spot, I would rather see more trees, and maybe there's talks about housing or something, fine, not seniors, but I would keep as much of that as you can. And I agree with the earlier commenter, that's overbuilt. You can't put more stuff there without there being more traffic problems. So I applaud it, I just don't think so. For Simon's Way too, there's a gun range there and a military base that's right there. Let's be real, that's not shutting down anytime soon, if at all, ever. So do you want to put a senior center right next to a gun range and then pretend that there's going to be outdoor space that seniors are going to feel comfortable using? If we're being real with ourselves, thinking purely for myself, I would say no. So let's look at what we have for opportunities, and I really think that this is such a great opportunity to control the narrative of what we want for downtown. We'll figure out transportation. If there's potential for funds to pull in from the state or federal, whatever. I've heard suggestions from neighbors and stuff about maybe having community busing, whether or not we pair that with others. Oh, down the line, not everybody's going to be driving. You will be walking. You could take an Uber or whatever comes next 30 years from now. So I would say there's a lot of good thoughts here, and I would leave you just with this. Too many times in our town, I hear about what's the 5-year plan, what's the 10-year plan, and that's great. Speaking from somebody who's 40s, I'm thinking long past me, way down the line as what I want Reading to look like. And I can't think of a better spot to control the narrative than Walgreens, whatever it is. So, thank you. Sorry for taking up so much time.
Chris, can I just add, as you're coming up, Chris, to Matt's point, there are 2 major capital projects that we're still paying for, the high school and the library. The high school comes off in 1 year? Or
The high school and Wood End come off in 2024, and the library comes off in 2025.
Right, so those 2 projects are gonna be coming off of the tax bills. And this is, more or less, the plan is to do capital projects in a way where when some finish, others start. Chris?
Thanks, Mark. I'd like to thank my much more eloquent twin that just came up. You put things a little bit nicer than I usually do. I think that what's being overlooked, obviously, is the parking situation. We all know it. It's been beaten to death, including by me, a majority of the time. Chris Haley, Tennyson Road. I think what's not being explored, which will obviously balloon the price in things, is just seeing about a parking garage behind the Walgreens attached to it, where you would drive in the existing way and drive out the existing way that's already existing over there. Obviously, that balloons the cost in it, but it'll somewhat solve the downtown parking situation if CVS can't have a garage over there because of the fire trucks and whatnot, not being able to make the corners and all that down there, because something has to be done for downtown. And if we lose the Walgreens building over there for any reason, regardless of what it's getting done for, that would be the last-ditch effort for a garage in the area that's going to actually work, which would, in theory, the cost of the Walgreens, if that was going to end up being done to it, should be significantly less than what it was offered for. So I like the points about Simon's Way and not knocking down and putting up parking lots all over the place. that was mentioned, but I just think that for this one, I keep hearing the and/or, the senior center killing thing and stuff coming off the books and overrides and all that stuff, but the end result is, it's got to be put to people in plain terms. Are your taxes going to go up? And if so, how much for this? If it's $50 a year, no one's saying no to $50 a year for both. If it's going to go up $3,000 a year for everyone, like, we just saw that 200-something seniors are qualifying for a tax relief, et cetera. Did they not go up by 2.5% additionally as well on any of these changes that are getting made? I think just seeing the numbers and just having it come down to that, and just, if it was explained that we can have this here, parking garage, the whole thing, $111 each person, everyone says this is incredible, fixes downtown, senior center, et cetera, sell the old one off, put a brewery in there or something. The neighborhood can debate what goes in there in the future. I just think that something has to be done, and it's up for the town to make the decision, and the residents, more importantly.
One question that hasn't come up. Oh, would you like to respond? Please.
Do I have to go up there?
Please, if you
I
would.
just actually have a question to what he just brought up. Jonathan Weber, 84 Hartshorn Street, again, sorry. What is the plan for the old Pleasant Street building?
I was just going to comment on that.
Because that's obviously an asset that could offset a whole bunch of this cost, depending upon what we do with it.
Yep.
Now,
So-
I also understand we're the town of Reading, and we like to
We should talk to Todd about that.
hold on to things very tight.
So, my fellow board member Carlo Bacci brought this up the other evening, in fact, also. So to this point, there already are a few options that could be considered. They could range from selling the building for particular activities, leasing the building. I personally like the idea of a restaurant going in there. We have heard an unsolicited offer to do some work on that building that would involve, it wouldn't require any additional parking, it would involve a limited number of residential units, if I understood it correctly. But unsolicited, we haven't gone out and solicited anything for that. Can I talk about RCTV? Might be able to use the space really well. And in fact, in Somerville, this is what they did with a very old firehouse, is their community access station used the space, took over the space. That would save the town some money in terms of rent that's currently being paid for the space. That could be an interesting use for it. One of the things that I think, whatever we do with the center, and the gentleman who was speaking before brought this up also, this could be kind of a 24/7 vibrant sort of place. I'm not suggesting everybody's staying up all night, just to be clear, but there are a lot of things that could happen. We didn't share with you the survey results that came back, and there was a lot of interest in multi-generational activities. So it may be that this space could be used many, many hours a day and be part of that vibrant downtown that we're talking about, which could be a really interesting idea for that also. In terms of growth, if we decided to keep the Pleasant Street Center, it may be that if we're using a little bit of a decentralized approach, then across the street isn't too far away. So that might be a possibility also. So I think anything from do nothing, hold it, we need the space, to think about leasing options, sales options, RCTV, and this is just kind of the start of the discussion. All open. Please.
So has there been any look to make this a campus-type design?
Going across the street?
Well, the street would obviously go through it, yeah, but you'd have, obviously, the space you have, being able to bookend that with the space across the street. It changes things up a little bit. And it might provide a little bit more of that indoor-outdoor that we saw from John earlier.
So, to my knowledge, that hasn't been considered at all at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Karen, please.
Thank you. Karen Herrick, Vice Chair of the Planning Select Board. This has been great listening to you all tonight, and really enjoyed the architect's presentation because I haven't been an integral part of the recalc, and I feel like I have catching up to do. So I think that was very helpful tonight. I hope you all did as well. I just wanted to share Mark and I have been having some conversations with the Chamber of Commerce and some of the businesses, so I just wanted to share some feedback. We talked to them about this concept of moving Pleasant Street Center activities and folks into the Walgreens and being able to serve a higher level of clientele and bring more people into the downtown, and I just wanted to share that. They sounded interested. They don't think that would be a bad fit for their town, at least a limited number of businesses we talked to, because, and this gets back to the survey results, preliminary, I think about 39 to 40% thought an in-town location would be very good. And so I think a lot of people are thinking, well, if I'm down there anyway for an activity, I can take care of some other errands. So I just wanted to share that feedback from just initial conversations with the businesses in our downtown.
Anyone else that would like to speak? Anyone online that would like to speak? So we brought up a couple of issues: parking, Pleasant Street Center, making sure that we meet the needs. Are there other issues that you'd like to see as part of this discussion? Things that we're making sure of beyond what you saw so far? Because I think that's what would really help in deciding how can we make this facility either work or not work. Those are the kinds of things we need to understand. Is there anything else that comes up? Please. Can I ask you to come up? I'm sorry. Maybe you should bring a chair. Bring a chair.
I just think that people need to see a clearer picture. The architect was great and brought some great slides and, showed us a lot of great things, as it was mentioned earlier in Lexington, Kentucky, where that's the Taj Mahal, right? I think if you're going to sell anything in this town, and that's what this is going to be a sale to the people of Reading, that this is worth their investment. I think you need to get a really clear picture of what is going to happen and how you're going to handle the parking situation and how you're going to address all of the things that have been brought up here tonight before you bring that to town meeting, before you bring it to the people of Reading to vote on it. And as I said earlier, I am entirely supportive of what we're doing here. The big issue is getting folks to understand the benefit of it. And you're going to have a tough time with that right now. Fuel costs are through the roof. It's going to be a long winter. And I'll tell you, in February, to have this discussion in February is going to be difficult. Especially, when we're talking about taking care of our elderly community. By the way, I'm always nervous just putting a label on anybody whatsoever, so I apologize if I use the wrong term. 60 plus, I knew there was a new rule, I just didn't have it yet. I think it's just so important for people to understand we've got people on fixed incomes, and to throw more at them to contribute is difficult, especially with a tough winter coming up. And, for the remaining people in town, I think you're going to find that people that are not on a fixed income, they're more than willing to contribute to something in the town, as long as it makes sense. It's going to be a good long-term plan. I also do want to comment on the fact that you're right, we control the narrative. I don't remember the gentleman's name. We control the narrative right now because there could very easily be a 5-story apartment building proposed to go right there. And at that point, what little bit of Norman Rockwell is left in this town is gone. So that's it, but thank you.
Oh, please, go ahead, Michelle.
Hello, I'm Michelle Klopper, Hanscom Avenue, and I'm someone who is very involved in access. So what I do want to make a comment, first of all, is thank you for all these wonderful thoughts and ideas that people have. It's been absolutely very stimulating. So thank you. And as we all know, that parking's a big issue. The first presentation tonight from the Institute for Human-Centered Design talked about context. And so parking keeps coming up. So if you look at the ADA design standards, which were last looked at in 2010, they'll tell you how many accessible parking spots there needs to be. We know that parking's an issue, so one of the things, whatever decision gets made, if that site, let's say, I can't remember, it's 35 or 50, I haven't had to deal with parking personally in a while, like they'll say one space, you should consider doing double the number of accessible spaces, because the context is that mobility impairments increase with age. So we're having, from a context perspective, more people with those types of impairments. So you want to say, well, oh, the architect will tell us, oh, that's adequate, minimal standard. But this context is look at the population. So I just want to say that whatever this goes, we want to keep in mind the context, and the parking keeps coming up. So I just felt I needed to throw that out there for consideration. But thank you.
Thank you.
Interesting discussion.
Please do. And Carolina.
David Zeke, 8 Sanborn Street. I hear two conversations going on, and one of them is about the opportunity to buy this Walgreens building, and the other is about the senior center. And I think maybe we should separate those ideas. If we think that it would be helpful for the town to control that building for whatever number of reasons, then we should pursue purchasing that building. And maybe we turn around and sell it again, or maybe we do some other packaging or move something in there that's not the senior center. But I think the senior center question is more complicated, and we should continue to work on that. And so I think February is an artificial deadline for us. If we feel like we have to both decide what to do about the senior center and what to do about the Walgreens building because they're conjoined, then we may, I just fear we'll make a decision that doesn't really please us. But if we think that it's important to control the downtown property, that's, the Walgreens building is obviously a prime property in the downtown area, and Reading could do a lot of things with it. And again, if we can't think of anything to do with it, then dump it, but put up that 5-story, condo over there. Thank you.
Carl?
I don't think I need to get up. I think you should mention the survey results that are going to be tabulated to everybody that.
Sure. So we mentioned the survey with the 1,470 responses. The select board did get a preview of kind of some of the highlights in terms of what the feedback was. And December 6th? 8th?
December 6th.
December 6th, we're going to get kind of the full results of what came back from the survey. But hopefully most of you in the room filled out the survey. Some of the things that I think were very interesting that came back was one, a lot of discussion of multi-generational center. I think that was a very strong bit of feedback. Number 2 was how important is downtown? And I think Karen mentioned, I think 30-some-odd% talked about downtown preferred. Many people didn't have a strong preference in terms of where it would be. Carol, were there others you wanted me to highlight?
No, I just wanted to be mentioned that, because you mentioned the survey, that there's still a lot of data to go through.
Yes. Yeah.
For us in the town, as far as needs, because as we know, programming is the main purpose of a senior center.
Yes, yeah. So what Carla was saying is that programming is a critical aspect. And again, whatever the facility, whether it's existing or new or whatever, programming is very, very important, and understanding the needs. The process that we've been using to understand the needs has been to ask, what's the activity people are interested in, and how many people might we need to serve? That could get converted to how many square feet that means at the end of the day. But the focus is, what are the activities, how many people do we think? Both on a regular basis and on a peak basis, right? If we built everything for the peak, 36,000 square feet wouldn't be enough. But building it in a way that we have multifunction rooms. And you saw in the drawing the idea of multifunction, and we've heard from many, many people that was great as a way to put the kind of the Lincoln Logs together just for a minute, but it has nothing to do with what we finally will get to. So what we're trying to do is make sure that we've heard the community, understand the needs, analyze the survey that 1,470 of your fellow residents have filled out, get all the best practice information we can bring to it. And again, we visited, John Sasso, 14 or 15 centers, I don't know if John's still on, but
15.
15, great. So we see what some other communities are doing, and we think that has to be very good input into what we're doing here as well. So we're trying to gather things. Last gentleman's point, can we do all this by February? Is that the right timing? Don't know. There is the possibility of acting, in that time frame, which would mean that in the April town election, if town meeting approved this, then the April town election, the voters could make a decision on it. So that has cost benefits and some advantages. If we don't do something like that, it may be that the developer decides to look at other opportunities. Todd's point is spot on. I think this is a great opportunity for the developer. And I think there's plenty of negotiating room as a result of that. But we as a community, I think, need to decide, is this a space that can work for us? And we want to do everything we can to make sure we understand that. We want to get as much input as we can. And yes, it's going to be a huge outreach to the community to say, hey, here's what we're thinking, here's the opportunity. Come and ask questions, we'll give you the answers, as we know them, we'll answer whatever we can. But I also want people to think about whatever we do, make our big wish list. We won't be able to do everything that's on the list. It's just not realistic to think that way. There are some trade-offs, and we'll have to decide which ones make sense and which ones don't. Core needs, we can't trade off. Some things on the wish list we may want. We may want gain on this and lose on that. That may be what we decide to do. I don't see the perfect solution. If others in the room do, please share. But I think we got to kind of think about it that way and decide, is this the right opportunity? If it is, great, then let's push. And if it's not, okay, we'll pull back. Yes.
The recount committee did a great presentation to the select board. I think it was on the 25th. And they're out there in the attachments or the packet or whatever. So if anybody wants to go looking for that, it provides some really good background information on what's been done. And it includes the preliminary UMass results. So I would suggest people to take a look at that.
Yeah, I'm looking to Jenna. Is that on the Recalc webpage now? Is it available? Okay, maybe we can make it available.
It's on
that way.
YouTube and the RCTV too.
Yeah, great. So Recalc does have a webpage on the town website. There are newsletters that have been published. The committee has done a great job, and John Sasso has done a tremendous job kind of pushing that out there. Many of the presentations are there. We can get the survey results put up there as well, so it's a great place to look. And if you want, you can sign up to be kind of on the list, and things will get pushed out to you, actually. Any other questions or comments or ideas? Yes. So I'm sorry, can I ask this person who has not spoken first and then Todd to follow? Absolutely.
So this is a quickie, Andrea Catone, also Rustic Lane. I noticed as we were talking about the priorities would be things like parking and stuff like that, and I noticed that came up as parking. It did not come up as transportation. And I feel like that needs to be the deepest dive. It seems like it's tangential, but it's going to be a much larger issue, not just for the senior center wherever it lands, but also for the entire town. We need to start thinking beyond everybody has to drive everywhere. And that's not just about seniors who might not want to drive as much anymore. I even think about myself, when I was working at Mass General, I took the shuttle everywhere. It gets you everywhere in Boston. It was great. I could drive perfectly fine, but why? That's part of the universal design idea, I believe they were talking about earlier. It works very well for the folks who need it, but it can also work for everybody else in the process. And I feel like doing a deeper dive into the transport issue could actually help us take a step back from, but what about the parking spaces? Because if everybody doesn't need to drive there, then we might not need all of those spaces. So just my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you for bringing that up. That actually has come up very frequently as more of a transportation need in general, as opposed to just the issue of parking. And Tom Model had mentioned that there may be some state activities focused on this. by the way, we also have the possibility, are we on not the earmark list, what's the list that we got onto for the $1 million potential?
It's the economic development bill.
The economic development bill that was recently, finally, almost approved, if it gets approved.
No, I was at a legislative update today with Brett Mike Day in Stoneham, and he's still optimistic and said if we don't get it done now, he's like, I see it being a high priority for the beginning of 2023, so I wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, so Senator Lewis plugged in $1 million potential opportunity toward a senior center in town, which is not a guarantee that we would get it, even if the economic development bill passes, but it's an opportunity to pitch for it. If it wasn't there, we wouldn't be able to pitch for it. So we're looking in every spot, nook and cranny for funds. We appreciate that. It's expensive.
We're gonna have a jar outside of the door. Drop in a quarter or two.
Todd, sorry.
So speaking of that, though, there was,
Ron, can I ask you to just come up here?
just on the survey, Mark, there was, people are willing to out. Ron
All the way.
Rustic Lane. My neighbors, they live next door to me. The survey did indicate that people were willing to pay money for this as well too, as part of their tax. It wasn't a lot. I think it was between $100 to $200 to $300 a year. I know that's a lot of money for some people. In the grand scheme of things, for something that is going to benefit the community overall, it's not a lot of money. I just wanted to call that out.
Yeah,
as part
no,
of the
thank you.
survey.
Actually, if you look at the survey results, if I remember correctly, close to 50% said they'd be willing to spend at least $100 extra. And accordingly, the others said no. So Todd was next. Oh, sorry.
I think there were 10% that said no opinion.
Could be 10% no opinion.
Yeah, so they're swing
So
votes.
swayable. Okay.
Hi, independence. We love independence in Massachusetts.
Todd Merkel, Sanborn Lane. This is just a curiosity because I happened to drive by it today. I drive by it almost every day, but I'm just curious. It sounds like they didn't respond to either RFP, but do any of you know what's going on with the former Rite Aid location on Haven Street?
Oh, yeah. There is a proposal before CPDC. It is owned by a private entity that is looking to get final approval for a mixed-use development in there.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Sorry?
More condos?
Mixed use.
Matt Holman, Beach Street. Couple of just things is, we are piggybacking on the transportation. The entire area around the current senior center and on that side of Main Street, so the Wakefield side of Main Street, is not the best walkability either. I know it's been talked about with Economic Development Committee since pre-COVID, because you go Green Street, I'm not letting my kids walk down there by themselves. I don't even like walking there because you have sidewalk on one side of the street and then it's gone and you have to go to the other side of the street and then you gotta go back and forth. And all those streets are like that. So if we're talking transportation to and from, I'd love to walk downtown more, but I hesitate when I'm walking with my kids to come downtown because of those issues. Particularly down at the end of Green Street now where they just put that where that monster comp collects in, because the cars whipping around that corner don't see anybody because they can't see around the corner until they're already around the corner. I want to agree with some of the others. I think the Walgreens building is important to the town, but I also agree that I don't think the senior center fits there. I don't know where to put it. One thought of mine, somebody brought up the RMLD building in there. I didn't hear anybody mention it, but there is the whole Economic Development Committee process right now for that entire area from the DPW all the way down to where Ash meets Main Street. And something could be put in there, just brand new if we want it, moving things around, whether it's the RMLD building or something else, particularly if what we get for that area works out, where we make it walkable from there into the downtown. One of the things I kept proposing, and I put it on thing over at the RMLD a couple weeks ago was to make some sort of walking bridge over the tracks or tunnel, or I don't care, just so we can cross the tracks without having to walk on the tracks. So people can get from one side to the other, because that was one of the main points. Maybe it can be over there. I know mentioned it would be great to have it downtown because it makes it walkable to the vibrant downtown. You know, there's a lot of things on downtown, as was said, that aren't open at night. So that's a whole different issue. That maybe as things go out of business, we can restrict on what goes back in there. We got too many gas stations and too many repair shops. Those aren't really what you want in a vibrant downtown. You want those backwards. But anyway, those are the points there. And then, you know, yeah, I was going to ask about the Rite Aid too, but apparently that's something. But to me, I want the condos there by the train tracks, not in my backyard where we just did with the Eaton Lakeview apartments. I'd much rather them right by the tracks where they're convenient and where they can get funds for other things. And hopefully they can stop any more 40B projects. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else like to speak? Anybody online? Okay, I think we should draw to a close. Thank you very much, folks, for coming. Please tell your friends and neighbors to ask questions, come talk to us about it, and we'll take this to the next step and keep asking. Kyle? Is there a second? Thank you. Okay, we're gonna go through roll call.
Oh, yeah, we need to move.
You can do it just a second also. So, Jackie, are you online? She dropped off. Okay, so we're all here present. Select board members, all those in favor of adjourning?
Adjourning.
Karen?
Adjourning select
Karen?
board.
Karen? Adjourning? Thank you. Select board is adjourned 4-0.
I think our quorum's gone.
Yeah, it is.
Then you're already adjourned.
No,